It's hard to fully discuss the career of the UFC lightweight and sometimes welterweight Kevin Lee without an appreciation for the many asterisks that surround his ongoing development. I mean, it is difficult to call him a prospect at this point, given that he has fought at the top level for about 8 fights now, competing for the UFC interim lightweight title in the process. But that's the thing with Kevin Lee. As much as he is an established figure within the UFC at this point in time, it still seems like he's something of a work in progress. Sure, the fact that he is a recognizable name within the sport probably stems more from his work on the mic than his performances inside the octagon. But don't get me wrong, the Motown phenom occupies a rather odd position within the MMA world. At 28 years old, it's probably safe to assume that Lee is now approaching or already in the midst of his fighting prime. It's clear that he's talented. I know a lot of you watching probably have a lot of resentment for Lee and his attitude, and to be honest, it is understandable to some extent. His gimmick isn't exactly the most compelling theatre. A lot of the time his persona comes off as forced, and all things considered, he hasn't quite been able to pull off the vibe that he's clearly shooting for. But don't let that distract you from his undeniable talent, from the strengths he brings to the table. If I may call things to a brief halt for a moment, we're really trying to make an extra effort to push this channel up to the next level. We know there's been a lot of love over the last few months from all of you in the MMA Dive commenting community. So if you are enjoying this content, be sure to leave a like and a comment on the video to let the powers that be at YouTube know that we are doing something right. Obviously, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, be sure to get on board now so you can stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. And with that out of the way, let's get back to the video. Kevin Lee is a fighter whose progress I have followed with great interest for some time now. My first exposure to him came when he fought on a UFC Belfast event back in 2016, submitting Magomed Mustafayev in what was a performance of the night winning effort. Now, this was long before he became the more outspoken fixture that he is today, but even then, a few things struck me about this lightweight prospect. Firstly, his sheer size and general makeup were incredibly impressive. Lee stands at a relatively average height of 5'9", which at 155 pounds is pretty much bang on average, perhaps even slightly below. But it's that 77-inch reach that makes him stand out among the rest. That's nothing less than a gargantuan wingspan for someone his height. In terms of being a pure athlete, Kevin Lee is an outstanding physical specimen. Though shackled by the obvious restraints that come with being an athlete of such an explosive, fast-twitch, muscle fiber-laden nature, Lee on paper is perfectly built to be a fighter. From his athleticism to his body's makeup, even in his earliest UFC outings, it was clear to me that this was a very special athlete, one who with the right guidance and refinement could become a truly excellent talent. But like many fighters who have been gifted with such physical traits, having a defining feature or set of features like that is one thing, using those gifts is another thing entirely. Look at the heavyweight veteran Stefan Struve. As the tallest fighter in UFC history at a towering 7 foot, it would be easy to assume that his range would be a major strength in his game. But as some of you might know, Struve has struggled to put it all together, struggled to fight with that length pushed to the fore, in a way that does justice to that massive reach. Now, I'm not saying Kevin Lee doesn't always fail to use that reach and explosive energy well. As a matter of fact, the most recent victory on his record, his first round KO of Gregor Gillespie, showcased him putting it all together excellently. He used his reach to score the harder shots in 50-50 situations, and when the opportunity presented itself, he exploded with one of the finest and most brutal head kick KOs we've ever seen. I'm a huge Gregor Gillespie fan, and even now he's a fighter I've pegged for future title contention. But on that night, Kevin Lee looked like the elite talent many had predicted him to be. And then he went out there after missing weight once again and was beaten down by Charles Oliveira on his way to a third round submission defeat. He just didn't look like the killer who'd stepped in there with Gillespie just one fight beforehand. And it is quite difficult to pinpoint that one defining hole in the game of Kevin Lee. Oftentimes as fans, we oversimplify what it takes to get in there on a given date and perform. As it has been said on many occasions, MMA fighters don't have the luxury of competing every week or so, like in most team sports. They have to sit there and soak in their last performance, good or bad, spending months mulling over every second of what is truly only a glimpse of the entire process. Lee's issues with making weight and not showing up in certain fights does seem to indicate that his problems are indeed mental, but I also think that he's in a very unfortunate position between the lightweight and welterweight divisions. As one of the larger and more muscle-bound 155-pound fighters on the roster, Lee, perhaps more than any other fighter, would benefit hugely from a middle ground between the two divisions, the often cited but highly unlikely 165-pound weight class. In many ways, he is a fighter that is without a true home in the UFC. And I know that doesn't excuse his other shortcomings, but I think the entire conversation around Kevin Lee needs to take into consideration the various things that have made his ongoing run in the sport what it has been. Because as patchy a run as he has had, Lee is also quite unlucky. Okay, perhaps unlucky is the wrong word, but all in all, his run through the UFC has been an odd one. That staph infection that in many ways hindered the type of consistency round by round that it takes to outlast Tony Ferguson, his ill-fated attempt at climbing up to welterweight, something that made his lack of a real home quite clear. From the weight cuts to the inconsistencies, Lee's 4-4 record against ranked opposition is almost the perfect indicator of his progress. But even with all of this being the case, I still think Kevin Lee has the potential to get through it all. Sure, he's a bit chinny from time to time, and the questions around his mentality are justified to some extent. But I see a fighter whose potential is still very much ahead of him. That athleticism, his wrestling background, the huge reach, his explosive motions, vastly improving striking, they're all traits that are mirrored by a similar number of shortcomings in his overall game. However, I do have more faith in the Motown phenom than most do. Indeed, his trash-talking game is a bit rubbish, all things considered, but if we're speaking about the holes in Kevin Lee's game, I thought it was only fair to outline his tremendous strengths as well. A fighter with attributes like his shouldn't ever be counted out while knocking on the door of his prime years. I don't know what will happen, but I do know that Lee's next matchup, whenever it is absolutely pivotal. What do you think the future holds for Kevin Lee? Do you see a future for him at lightweight or welterweight? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, because it does help us out with the YouTube algorithms and we want to continue bringing you premium content every week. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like before subscribing to the channel to stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. And as always, thank you for watching.